Being rejected hurts, but being ignored, that's a different kind of pain. You send a message, no response. You speak in a group, no one acknowledges what you said. You walk into a room, and the conversation continues as if you weren't there. Not hostile, not dismissive, just nothing. And that nothing cuts deeper than any argument ever could. Because rejection at least confirms you exist. It confirms you were seen, considered, and declined. But being ignored, that confirms something far more unsettling. That you might as well not be there at all. This isn't sensitivity. It's not overreacting. It's a fundamental threat to something the human brain cannot tolerate. The sense that you don't register. That your presence, your words, your existence don't matter enough to be noticed. From a psychological perspective, ostracism, the experience of being excluded or ignored, activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain treats social invisibility the way it treats being physically injured, which is why the silent treatment, the unanswered text, the conversation that moves on without you, doesn't just hurt your feelings, it hurts. What makes this pattern so devastating is that it feels impossible to fight. You can argue with rejection. You can defend yourself against criticism. But how do you fight being unseen? How do you prove you exist to people who act like you don't? The answer is more complex than most people realize. And it starts with understanding why invisibility feels like the worst thing that can happen to you. But here's what almost no one talks about. The pain isn't just emotional, it's neurological. And once you see how deeply it's wired into you, the experience of being ignored stops feeling like a personal failing and starts making brutal, undeniable sense. There's a question most people never think to ask. Not why does rejection hurt? That one's obvious. But why does being ignored hurt more? Why does the absence of a response, the conversation that moves on without you, the message that stays unanswered, land harder than being told no? Why does nothing feel worse than something? The answer lives deeper than most people expect. Not in sensitivity, not in insecurity, but in the architecture of the human brain itself. In neural pathways that haven't changed in thousands of years. In a survival system that was never designed to distinguish between physical danger and social invisibility. Between a predator in the dark and a room that continues without you. In the next 10 minutes, you'll understand why being ignored activates the same neurological response as physical pain. Why the silent treatment, the unanswered text, the group that moves on, aren't minor social discomforts, and why the experience of being unseen is, for the human brain, one of the most destabilizing things that can happen. Not metaphorically, literally. This is the psychology of social invisibility, and once you see it clearly, you won't experience silence the same way again. Picture this. You're at a dinner table. Friends, colleagues, maybe family. Someone asks a question, you answer it, and the conversation keeps moving. Not because your answer was wrong, not because anyone disagreed, but because it passed through the room like it was never spoken. A few seconds later, someone else says something similar, and everyone laughs. Everyone leans in, and you sit there, quietly recalibrating what just happened, wondering if you actually spoke at all. This is the moment most people dismiss as insignificant. I'm being too sensitive. It wasn't a big deal. I'll get over it. But the body doesn't agree. Something tightens in the chest. The jaw locks. There's a low, dull weight that settles somewhere between the stomach and the throat. Harder to locate than sadness. Harder to explain than anger. You don't feel hurt in a way you can point to. You feel erased. And erasure is a particular kind of wound because it doesn't give you anything to push back against. Psychologists call this experience ostracism. And what makes it uniquely brutal compared to other forms of social pain is precisely what seems to make it minor: the absence of action. Nobody attacked you. Nobody lied about you. Nothing happened. And yet, the brain responds to that nothing the way it responds to something deeply threatening. Because in the architecture of human psychology, invisibility isn't neutral. It never has been. And to understand why it cuts the way it does, you have to go back further than you might expect. In 2003, psychologist Kipling Williams conducted one of the most influential studies in social neuroscience. Participants played a simple virtual ball-tossing game called cyberball. At first, everyone was included. Then, without warning, the other players stopped throwing the ball to them. No insults, no explanation, just silence. And even when participants knew the other players were computer programs, their brains reacted as if something real had been lost. Brain scans showed activation in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region involved in processing physical pain. To the brain, exclusion didn't register as inconvenience. It registered as injury. Because for most of human history, exclusion wasn't symbolic. It was dangerous. To be ignored by the group meant losing protection, resources, and survival itself. This is the foundation of what psychologists call the need to belong. Belonging isn't emotional luxury, it's biological necessity. Which means when someone ignores you today, your nervous system doesn't interpret it as neutral. It interprets it as threat. And unlike rejection, which gives closure, ostracism gives nothing. No signal, no explanation. And the brain struggles most with what it cannot explain. When the brain detects that it's being ignored, it immediately tries to resolve the uncertainty. It searches for meaning, it scans memory, it turns inward. What did I do wrong? Am I too much? Not enough? Do I matter at all? This isn't insecurity. It's the predictive brain trying to close an open loop. And without external answers, it defaults to the safest evolutionary assumption. I am the problem. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger found that the same neural systems that regulate physical injury respond to social exclusion. The nervous system attempts to dampen the pain. But unlike physical wounds, social invisibility rarely has a clear endpoint. Rejection ends. Silence continues. And that unresolved signal can keep the nervous system in a prolonged state of low-grade threat, long after the moment itself has passed. Over time, sustained ostracism produces what researchers call cognitive deconstruction, a protective shutdown. Emotional responsiveness dulls, motivation weakens, meaning feels less accessible. It isn't dramatic, it's quiet, but it slowly alters how a person relates to themselves, and why that impact varies so much from person to person reveals something even deeper. Not everyone experiences ostracism equally. Individuals with higher attachment sensitivity, often shaped by early inconsistent connection, develop nervous systems that detect social threat faster. A delayed reply, a lack of eye contact, or a subtle shift in tone can register as abandonment. Not because the reaction is irrational, but because the brain is protecting against patterns it learned early. Cultural conditioning reinforces this silence. Many people are taught to appear unaffected, to suppress visible reaction. But suppression doesn't deactivate the threat response, it only hides it. And hidden social pain often reappears as anxiety, emotional withdrawal, or a persistent sense of tension in social environments. And perhaps most counterintuitive of all, ostracism is often harder to recover from than conflict. Conflict provides signal. It can be understood. Silence provides nothing. No explanation, no ending. And the brain, designed to resolve patterns, continues searching long after the moment has passed, trying to find meaning in an absence that never provided one. Think about the workplace. Someone shares an idea in a meeting. No one responds. The meeting moves on. A few minutes later, a colleague raises something similar, and the room engages. Questions are asked. The idea is explored. The first person sits quietly, recalibrating. They don't say anything. They don't raise their hand. They just shrink. And the next meeting, they come in a little quieter. And the one after that, quieter still. Not because they stopped having ideas, but because the brain learned, from silence, that offering them came with a cost. This is how ostracism operates in relationships too. It rarely announces itself. It accumulates. A partner who stops asking how your day was. A friend who responds to your messages with one word where they used to write paragraphs. A family member who looks through you at gatherings rather than at you. None of these moments feel dramatic enough to address directly, and that's precisely what makes them so corrosive. Because the person experiencing it begins to question their own perception. Am I imagining this? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe nothing has changed. The self-doubt becomes its own kind of pain, layered on top of the original wound. And then there's the digital world, which has created entirely new surfaces for invisibility to land on. The message delivered, but never opened. The post that everyone else's received responses on, but not yours. The group chat that goes quiet the moment you contribute. These aren't minor inconveniences. For a brain wired to treat social exclusion as a threat signal, they register with the same neurological weight as being left out of the room. The medium changes, the pain doesn't. And once you see the pattern, in workplaces, in relationships, in the quiet corners of daily life, you start to understand why people respond to being ignored the way they do. Which brings us to the part most people never think about. The first thing worth understanding, and this is harder than it sounds, is that the pain of being ignored is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something is working correctly. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, flagging a threat to belonging. The problem isn't the signal. The problem is when we mistake the signal for a verdict. When the brain says you weren't noticed, and we translate that into, you aren't worth noticing. Those are not the same sentence. But in the absence of external information, the mind collapses them into one. Recognizing that collapse, catching it in the moment, is the beginning of something important. The second thing is this. Not all invisibility is about you. Some of it is about the other person's capacity. People who are emotionally unavailable, socially distracted, or running their own unresolved pain often disappear into themselves, not away from you. This doesn't make the experience less painful, but it changes what the silence means, and meaning is everything, neurologically speaking. Research on cognitive reappraisal. the practice of consciously reinterpreting an emotional event shows that it genuinely alters the brain's stress response. You're not pretending the pain isn't there. You're changing the story the brain is building around it. A small shift in interpretation can interrupt the spiral before it becomes a verdict. The third thing, and perhaps the most practical, is to resist the pull toward silence in return. When people feel ignored, the instinctive response is withdrawal. To become invisible before someone else can make you invisible again. It feels protective, but it tends to deepen the disconnection rather than resolve it. Where it's safe to do so, naming the experience calmly, without accusation, creates the one thing ostracism never provides: a signal. I felt like I disappeared in that conversation. That's not a confrontation. It's an opening, and sometimes that's all the situation needed. Because here's what the research ultimately points to, and it's something worth sitting with. There's something quietly radical about understanding this, about recognizing that the pain of being ignored isn't weakness, isn't fragility, isn't proof that you need too much. It's the sound of a deeply human system working exactly as it was built to work, protecting something that matters. The need to be seen isn't vanity. It never was. It's one of the oldest, most legitimate needs a person can carry. And maybe that's the real reframe. Not why don't they see me? But what does it mean that being seen matters this much to me? Because the answer to that question isn't a flaw to fix. It's a map. It points toward what you value, what you need, what kind of presence you want to offer the people in your life, and what kind you deserve to receive in return. Being invisible in a room full of people is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have. But understanding why it hurts makes you slightly less alone in it. Being seen is not a luxury. It never was. It's something the human brain has needed since before language existed, since the first moment a person looked across a fire and needed to know they registered in someone else's eyes. That need didn't disappear when the world got louder. It just got harder to admit. So if you've ever felt the specific ache of being in a room and not existing in it, know that what you felt was real, neurologically real, humanly real, not oversensitivity, not weakness, just a very old system doing what it was always meant to do, reminding you that connection isn't optional, that your presence deserves to land somewhere. The question worth carrying forward isn't why don't they see me? It's am I showing up in ways that allow me to be seen? And am I offering that same quality of attention to the people around me? If this changed how you experience silence, your own or someone else's, tell me in the comments. To continue this understanding, watch the next video here. And to understand human behavior at a deeper level, subscribe. We decode psychology every week.